A lot of people think life begins when you're born or conceived or whatever other answers they're coming up with these days. For some people, though, life actually begins the day a doctor tells them that if they don't make some serious changes in their lives, they're going to die. You see, my life began the morning of my 41st birthday in January of 2019. I stood staring in the mirror, looking back on my life after stepping on the scale and finding out I was over 400 pounds for the second time in my life. You know, my dad died when I was 17. So my choice was plain to see in front of me. Either I take charge of my health, make the necessary changes to live, or do nothing and die knowing that my daughter, being only 6 years old, would spend the majority of her life calling some other man daddy. Can't you see? There's no one coming to save me in this moment. It was me who had to become the hero in my story. You know, we live in a world that has a system in place to remove all accountability from every decision we ever make. Taking accountability and fixing the problem is painful. It's like a journey through the pit of hell while feeling the pain of every lost soul that resides there. But in the end, the journey becomes the foundation of your testimony. My fight has become my calling. So if you're out there struggling and you hear the sound of my voice, I'm telling you that your story is not over. As long as you have breath in your lungs, there is still time. But it's your fight, your story, your moment to stand up and do what heroes do. It's a long road ahead, and it sucks. And maybe you're thinking you can't do it. But I'm here to tell you that you have all the tools you need. You always have, and you always will, because you are enough. And most of all, you are worth it. Nobody is more capable than you. Yeah, Friday! Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you may be listening. Thanks for making me part of your day. This is episode 257 of the Ranting Weight Watcher podcast. Before I get started today, I heard through some, some people reached out and stuff like that. I wanted to just reiterate, because I assume that everybody knows this, but you know what? Just with the people who reached out, I'm going to reiterate this again. There are a few different ways to listen to this podcast, okay? The most common ways are Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify, right? Those are the biggest ones, right? A lot of people listening on Apple Podcasts don't realize there is a video version of this podcast that cannot be seen on Apple Podcasts. Or literally, there's only two platforms that the video version of this podcast can be seen on, right? And that is Spotify and YouTube. They're the only two platforms where you can see the video version. Any other platform you're listening on, whether that's Amazon Music, Pandora, all of the other ones, can only be heard audio only, okay? So if seeing the video version of the podcast interests you, then you definitely want to jump over to Spotify or YouTube. Also, on YouTube, you'll see the walk talks that I put out every Saturday and every Sunday, right? So on top of a podcast that gets released every Friday, I go for a walk on Saturday and Sunday, and those are my big walks. And then at the end, I kind of do like a walk talk. And, think of it as like a 10-minute podcast while I'm walking, okay? And that's also a video that you could only see on YouTube or Spotify. No, I'm sorry, on YouTube only for that one. And also on TikTok if you want to see the walk talks. So walk talks are on TikTok and YouTube. Video podcast is on Spotify and YouTube. If you're looking for video, jump over to YouTube. That's the easiest way to say it. If you're looking for audio only, then you can stay right where you are and it's not a big deal. But I just want to make sure everyone knows about it because, some people reach out and I do this week after week and I just start to assume people know this already. But again, if video versions interest you, YouTube and Spotify, they're your best bet. If you like the idea of seeing the walk talks, YouTube, TikTok. Okay? All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into this. Journey updates. All right, the stats for the week of October 26th, 2025 to November 1st, 2025. Total steps taken. This was a big week, guys. Big week. 0 rest days that week. Total steps taken in that time, 112,355. That's an average steps per day of 16,051 steps per day. Total miles walked, 47.3 miles. That's an average miles per day of 6 3/4 miles per day. On November 1st, I stepped on that scale and I weighed in at 198.8 pounds. That's a 1.4 pound lost. Total pounds lost since January of 2019, 196.8 pounds. Total pounds remaining to make it to my 200-pound weight loss goal, 3.2 pounds. Just 3.2 pounds away from a goal that seemed truly unrealistic. Truly unrealistic on January 12th, 2019. And you know why it seems so unrealistic? I'm just going to get into this a little bit tonight. It seems so unrealistic because of the evidence of all of the failure of my past. You see, when you decide to do something good for yourself, the one thing that will happen in this world is the bad you've done will present itself in this moment. All of the failure, everything that can possibly deter you from making a good choice in your life will present itself in that moment. Because it's so much easier to fail or fall off. Like, think of this as a building, right? If you were entering the building and you go up, you enter in the lobby, right? And you go up to the first floor. So that's like day one, right? The year one is the first floor, right? It's easier to fall off the balcony from the first floor balcony than it is the, 100th floor balcony, right? And that's what the problem is. The problem is, even when you begin, you're still looking for the possibility of an out. Even when you begin, all of the failure of the past is still convincing you it's easy just to get out now. Almost like there's something on your shoulder whispering about all of the failures, all of the negativity in your life, all of the reasons you can't. All of the reasons you won't. All of the reasons you'll lose. And all of those voices were there on January 12th, 2019, because I had 41 years worth of those voices. I was 1 week past my 41st birthday when I entered that studio in Coral Springs. 1 week. So I had 41 years of voices whispering to me how possible it was for me to fail. How impossible it was for me to succeed. And how I'm wasting time and money even attempting. I tell you guys often, the biggest transition anybody needs to make, and you're not necessarily doing this on the first day. I don't know that I did it on the first day. I can't, as a matter of fact, I really can't pinpoint when I stopped saying I can't and started saying I can. When I stopped thinking about ways I couldn't do something and finally started thinking of ways I could do something. I can't pinpoint, because it might have been unconsciously that I did this. I could honestly tell you that consciously I did it when I introduced exercise. That's definite. But before that, I made a bunch of choices before that. You guys know the story. I started this journey deciding I couldn't, deciding I was too fat to exercise. That's how I started this journey. You can't exercise, you're too fat. That's literally how I spoke to myself. But it was accompanied inadvertently by what can I do? Now, did I physically ask myself that question? No, but I made a decision on things I could do. And one of the very first decisions I made was to make a menu and dabble into literally anything on the list that WW said was a low point value. Taste it all. Decide what I liked and concentrate on it. So unconsciously, I made a choice of what I can do in the very beginning. I chose that I could make a menu of food that I like to eat that WW would consider point friendly. And the goal behind this, even though I can kind of look back and not like this choice, but I had to, just like when I talked about last week, Jacob and Joseph, they had to go through what they went through, all of these things, in order to get to where they needed to be. So 7-year me can look back and not like this choice. But first-year me would never have been able to make the choices I make today. That's the truth. But this choice was to eat the lowest amounts of points possible for the I'm saying this backwards. Eat the most amount of food possible for the lowest amount of points possible. That was the goal. Now, I can look back today and not like that choice. That's based on the nutritional knowledge I have today. I did not have that then. I won't condemn it. And if it's a tool you need to get to where you're going to be, so long as you make the progression to evolve into what it is that comes later, it doesn't matter. However long this takes, it takes. It just has to progress. It can't stay there. And that's the thing people need to understand. The one thing you'll never understand is that it needs to progress if you keep saying, I can't. If you keep thinking about what you can't do. If you don't start thinking about what you can do. So the first choice I made was to make a list of food that I enjoyed eating that was as much food as possible for the least amount of points as possible, right? This way, I would never be hungry. And if I could control never being hungry, I would never go into the refrigerator when I didn't need to be there. Sooner or later, these choices, concentrating on these foods, eating as much food as I could eat for the least amount of points possible, that choice alone lost 50 pounds for me. And now I made the conscious choice to introduce exercise into my life. That was the next part of my evolution, the next part of my growth. People concentrate a lot on doing things, but there's no concentration whatsoever on growth. They take what they're told on day one and they think it's going to still work on day 2031. Well, they told it to me on my first. I'm doing those things. There's no growth. And they still sound like it's their first day. When the things that make them nervous pop up, they still sound like it's their first day because there's no growth. Nothing has changed. They're like robots. Wash, rinse, repeat. Wash, rinse, repeat. No learning. No growth. I told you guys the story of David. David didn't just go leave the field shepherding his flock to go face Goliath. He had to face all of the things in between to get there. The only way he faces every single one of those things is by growing. When he chose to fight the wild animals that invaded his flock, when he chose to scare them off and do what he needed to do to protect his flock, he was choosing growth because he knew the alternative was to lose some of his flock. And to not only lose it once, lose it over and over again. If a wild animal knew that there was prey, he'd come back, wouldn't he? If he knew there was a guaranteed food supply. There's a saying, if you want to get the wolves off your property, you don't hunt the wolves, you hunt the food that the wolves eat. Right? Same idea. But if the animals had a steady supply of food and he never fought them off, why would they stop coming? It's always been my dream, and one day I'll have a yard and I'll be able to do it. But it's always been my dream to have a koi pond. I love the aquarium hobby. And there are 3 different type of aquarium, to say the broad term. there are 3 different kinds of aquarium that are my dream. One of them is a planted discus tank, right? So would be discus fish, which come from Brazil, I believe, South American fish. But the plants in there would be alive. They wouldn't be the plastic stuff you buy from Walmart or whatever, PetSmart. It would be plants that were alive, and you had to concentrate just as much on keeping the plants alive as you do as keeping the fish alive. And this fish is known as the most difficult fish to keep alive in the freshwater aquarium hobby. The other tank I dream to keep is a saltwater aquarium. And the way these things go, it's like the pH balance. There's like, you stop paying attention for 1 second, you lose your whole tank. It's a very, very delicate situation. But the third thing is a koi pond. Now, ponds are outdoors. They're not in your home, right? And the funny thing is, I used to join all these like web forums, and I'd be chatting with people who had experience and wanting to know all the information I could possibly know about setting up a koi pond. And the one thing they say, well, what predators do you have in your area? And I would say, I don't have any predators. And they say, well, set up a koi pond and you'll see what predators you have. Because literally, when you supply the food, that's when you know what predators are available. But back to David, until, so I don't get too far off of the conversation here. David had to battle with wolves, battle with bears, battle with lions. He had to do all of those things, and all of those things were preparing him for Goliath. Joseph had to be essentially tormented by his brothers, sold into slavery, basically be accused of trying to rape the emperor, the Pharaoh's wife, and put in prison, all in preparation for Joseph to become who he needed to become. All of these people had to decide at one point what they could do. All of them. They had to stop saying, I can't. And they had to start saying, I can. It was in this moment in my journey, when I got the 50-pound charm, that I consciously, purposely thinking, what can I do here? I know I have to install exercise because I know I won't lose much more weight if I don't. What can I do? How long can I do it? How many times a week can I do it? How many weeks will I do it before I make a change? These are all of the things I decided before I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning that very first time and walked out the door. I decided I could walk in my parking lot. I did not have to leave. I could just circle it over and over again. I also decided I could walk for 15 minutes. It was that first time I quickly realized that 15 minutes was nothing. I could easily do 20. I also decided I could do it 3 days a week. And I also decided I would do it this way for 8 weeks before I made a change. Those are all of the I cans that started the entire exercise part of my journey. That's day one. That's all of the things I decided I could do at day one of exercise in my journey. And what used to be measured in minutes is now measured in miles. And you heard the stats. 47.3 miles walked in a week's time. Is that high for this week? Yes. I took no rest days last week. But you listen to me week after week. You can average out those numbers. You can see that there's consistent effort week after week. And maybe next week it won't be anywhere near it. Maybe it'll be 39 when I'm talking about this. Maybe it'll be 35. Maybe this will just be one anomaly. In the end, it doesn't matter. It just matters that I did it. And why did I do it? Because in August of 2019, I decided what I could do. I decided to stop physically saying I can't and start saying I can. I recently started reading about Moses. I didn't finish his story yet. Let me just say that first. I didn't finish his story yet. I'm just barely breaking in. We all know the story of Moses' beginning. The Pharaoh of that, and I wasn't sure if it was the same Pharaoh that Joseph, because they kind of go one right off the other, right? So I'm not even sure. Is it the same Pharaoh that gave such favor to Joseph, that ordered every male to be murdered, essentially sacrificed? Every male child. But whoever had Moses, put him in a basket, sent him down the river, and he was found by the Pharaoh's wife, who found favor with Moses. Named him, brought him up, raised him. He was raised in a palace. Went from being abandoned in a basket to raised in a palace. And his relationship with God told him what he was called to do. When I read these stories in the Bible, I can't help but get envious, right? Because the way these people encountered God, and the way they were so certain that they were encountering him. I'm envious of that. I'm not saying I can't do it. I'm saying I don't really feel like, when I see the certainty of the stories, I can't honestly say that I feel that certain, that I encountered God in that way. Like for, someone like, someone to be told, like Noah. Noah was told, build an ark. And he just started gathering the No matter how many people mocked him, he was living in a desert, essentially, that never had seen rain. God told him to build a boat. No doubt about it. No question. No, how do I do this? Just, okay. Tell me how. What are the measurements? Essentially, that's what the story tells us, right? And he got to work. And not only did he get to work, he made the entire family work on it. And I can only imagine what they were thinking. Let's think about this for a minute. Someone else tells you that God told them whatever. And then they say, here's the list of work you got to do. I mean, come on, there has to be a little doubt. Like, Dad, are you serious right now? But it was there. And I can't help but the idea that they are so certain that they are hearing God's voice and his instruction, and there's just zero doubt. I can't wait for the day that I feel the same. I'm not going to say that it'll never happen. I'm saying I can't wait for the day that I feel the same. But I can't help but think there's a common theme here in the stories I've read with Joseph, with David. They had to go through things. They had to learn things. They had to grow. They had to fail. They had to get up and keep moving. And David's journey didn't even end at Goliath. Goliath was just the first stop, the first major stop in his journey. He went on to be king and have all kinds of other challenges, including the kind of challenges that would bring judgment from the people of the world. You know, his challenges with women and all these other things. Rarely do they talk about that. But they were there. He had to go through that. He had to experience it. I sat in a workshop on Saturday morning. And the topic, sometimes, and it's because of how many years and how much I've grown, some of the topics I just can no longer be a part of. I can no longer relate to. I really, truly tried to get in touch with the person that really was struggling then, right? Because they're delivering message to the masses. They're not delivering the message to individual people. And I'm sure, because the one thing I could say is there's not much emphasis on growth. The entire system pushes a very easy message that you can eat what you want, essentially for the rest of your life. Everything's on the table. And you can get to the point of health. If you think a scale result means health, a lot of people will go on in the delusion that they reached a scale goal and they are healthy. But if they get there and they have all of the same addictions still, and they are constantly fighting these addictions, are they really healthy? Shouldn't part of the scale number be the growth of all of the other things? I mean, the reason we are all here, the reason you're watching this podcast, the reason you guys pay attention to my walk videos and love them so much, is because I'm part of the struggle story. I say things that you can relate to, but I say them from the other side now. I'm showing you that there's a pathway to victory. There's a pathway labeled with a sign that says, I can. But you have to get there. I do that every week. I had to recognize my hang-ups. I had to recognize my coping mechanisms. I had to recognize what needed to be done to transform my life so I could finally grow and evolve away from these coping mechanisms. In the process, I created other bad habits, and I had to unlearn all of those bad habits. And I still have plenty of bad habits to unlearn. The one thing I could tell you, even though I'm 3.2 pounds away from my goal, the one thing I can tell you is I have plenty of bad habits to grow from. There's plenty to still work on. A lot of people get to the scale number that they've been paying attention to that whole time, and they think, okay, time to maintain. Now, there's a learning process with maintenance. They can choose what they can do. They can choose what they won't do, just the same as the losing process. Or they can choose another mountain to climb. The choice is yours in the end. If you think the end of all this is a scale number, you're cutting your story short. Because I can sit here today and I could say, there's obviously so much more to the story that is my journey than achieving a scale result. There's so much, even though I sound like a broken record every week, saying the same monotonous, tedious things, repeating over and over again, endlessly saying the same things. None of you can say that they're untrue. None of you can say that they didn't get me here. And none of you can say that they won't get you here. Because my concentration is always on and always going to be on the fundamentals first. And then once the fundamentals exist, the other things come to play. All of the hang-ups, all of the stumbling blocks, all of the anchors, all of the addiction, all of it has to come to an end. This achieving a scale result isn't enough. You're selling yourself short. Your life is more valuable than that scale result. Your story is more valuable than the scale result. There's an audience waiting to hear your story. Just like you were waiting to hear mine. The problem is, you can achieve a scale result and never actually grow from any of the hang-ups, from any of the addiction, from any of the anchors. You can achieve it. You can manufacture that scale result and keep all of the problems that will send you right back to where you were. I'm the perfect evidence of that. In 2004, I manufactured a scale result by altering and mutilating my body. They cut me open. They rearranged my insides. I will never process certain foods ever again the same way. I gave myself health problems from that surgery that no one ever talked about, no one ever even foresaw. It took probably 10 years for them to start acknowledging, hey, the people that received this surgery probably also have this. But I can say to you now, I talk from the position I talk from because even that version of me wasn't enough. That version of me, though, was part of this story, is part of this testimony. God forbid if I somehow kept that scale result manufactured by that story. None of this would exist. None of this. This podcast, this entire testimony, being in Wonderland, probably wouldn't exist. If I didn't have that experience, that ultimate failure to lose 183 pounds in a year and gain it back in 15, this was the building blocks. This was, even though I thought that was the end of my journey, that was just another one. It was another wolf, another bear, another lion that I was facing before I can get to Goliath. And now I face the Goliath. And now I sit with some sign of authority that people look up to. And I have to have some semblance of responsibility. I have to always be aware of how I talk, what I say. Because some people are ready to hear what I have to say. And some people aren't. And this is a hard battle for me. Especially when I sit in workshops and they're talking about you're most likely to binge on food if you ever give it up. And from my perspective, I will say part of your growth is giving up anything you're addicted to. If you fear binging something because you're giving it up, you're addicted to it. There's some form of addiction there. And you may not like that word addiction, but it exists. And in 2025, there are plenty of foods that are more so chemical experiments made in a laboratory than they are food. And they're done that way for a reason. And there's a reason that big tobacco, when everybody figured out that tobacco was causing cancer, big tobacco sold a bunch of their stuff and invested in big food. And they took all of their scientists with them and they figured out how to make food just as addictive. And for everyone who's thinking that GLP-1 is your answer, GLP-1 is 2025's version of the gastric bypass surgery. That's all it is. And if you don't grow like I didn't grow, it's only so long because they have scientists working around the clock. You think they're just gonna let you win? You think big food is gonna let you win? You think they're just gonna accept losing millions of dollars, billions even, because you're no longer hungry? No, they have scientists working around the clock to get through the GLP-1 drug. And when they do that, you're going to sit here and say, it's not working anymore. And suddenly you find yourself at the highest dose And it's still not working. This is why it's very important for you to make the transition now. Drop these foods from your life no matter how much you're attached to them. While you have the tool, while the tool still works, drop these foods from your life. Turn away from them for good. For good. Whole foods, single ingredient foods. Eat as many of those things as possible. Change slowly over time. Change all of these highly addictive foods to whole foods. So that one day, when all of a sudden this GLP-1 doesn't work, at least you've broken the hold on these other foods on your life. And you're not at the beginning of the fight, you're at the end of a fight. Fight that war while the drug works, because the day is going to come when big food catches up and that drug will no longer work. And if you haven't done the hard thing to grow, you're going to be back at the chalkboard. Do the hard thing. Start making the hard choices now. There's nothing easy about this life. Anybody who made you believe otherwise was lying to you. They were completely delusional, and if you believe them, you're delusional. Start to do the hard work. Get serious. I love each and every one of you. God bless you all.